Welcome to the Refresher Training Module for Science Unit 2, Lesson 2 on Close Reading in the Sciences over DNA. So in Activity 1, we're going to help students set a purpose for reading. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at the Feel-In chapter and talk about the text features. So there's a lot of stuff going on in that chapter, and so the first thing that we're going to ask students to do is look at the relative importance of each feature and have them kind of figure out what's more important to what's less important. So some features that are really important are things like diagrams and figures, bold-faced words as they are related to concepts and science processes, and each section has a take-home message, which is sort of a synopsis of what students should have gained in the reading. All of those are pretty important features. There's also some photos, right? So there's a Time magazine picture, there's a picture of some cookies. Those things are kind of less important. They're in there as a high-interest visual, but there's a lot of material in there that's going to be important for them to remember, especially those figures and diagrams. And so just sort of going through that, talking about how the chapter is structured, helps them to get a sense of what this chapter is all about. It's also a good idea to talk about the purpose for reading. So there is a ton of bold-faced words in this chapter. And so students are going to want to think that they need to memorize a lot of stuff. And so we need to really make sure that they understand that the purpose is more than just learning at the definitional level. So they need to be able to understand how each of these concepts fit within the science processes. They're going to need to be able to cite multiple sources, text sources, as they discuss DNA. So it's not I think that, but they're going to have to keep going back to the text to back up what they're saying, both in class discussions and in their final product for this particular unit, which is a research poster symposium. They're also going to engage in reading across text. So they're going to do multiple readings of individual text for different goals, and then multiple readings across text for different perspectives. So they'll need to think about doing both as they move through this particular unit. The next activity, in Activity 2, they're going to be doing text annotations, starting with the Feel-In text and then moving to an article from the New York Times. So if students have not completed Science Unit 1, it's a good idea to go over that information using the information from Unit 1, Lesson 2. So in Unit 2, we just have a really brief explanation of annotation, figuring that students have been through this particular strategy before. If they haven't, everything that you need is in Unit 1, Lesson 2, and you'll just need to be able to talk about it in terms of the DNA chapter. So just going over the basics, and then when it's asking them to apply it, go ahead and use that Feel-In Chapter 5. So otherwise, just briefly review the text annotation strategy. They will have had lots of practice in Unit 1, so they'll be fairly familiar with it. And you're going to work through Feel-In 5.1 together as a class. And as you go through 5.1, they're going to use several different ways to approach the reading. A little bit of reading aloud, a little bit of teacher modeling of the reading, and then some paired reading and annotating. And I think it's pretty important for you to do a little bit of reading and modeling what you're thinking about as you read. And some of the text-dependent questions that are in the lesson plan is a good way to kind of model your thinking as you're going through the beginning of the chapter, thinking about the decisions that the author is making, thinking about the tone of the chapter, thinking about the way the material is presented. That will help them work through the rest of the chapter. So as they go through annotation and the process, remind them that at the end of this, we're going to debrief on the annotation strategy. So they'll be able to talk about what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it, and so forth. So have them start thinking about it as they start that annotation process. So as you're looking at the beginning of Feel-In 5.1, talk about the introduction. So this is a pretty heavy-hitting science chapter that the author chooses to start with a story. So talk to students about why might the author have made that choice, and in telling this story, why are there so many negative terms used? In the beginning of that particular section, talks a lot about how DNA is used in criminal cases. So think about why an author might have chosen to use that story, why they might use the terms that they did, and what that means for the rest of the chapter. And when I talk to students about it, I try to tell them that it's really actually pretty good news that the author is trying to engage students in the story of DNA and why it's so important, rather than just presenting it as a bunch of different science processes. Right from the beginning, that author is trying to connect it to everyday life, and we'll be doing that through the rest of the chapter as well. So that's good news for students. While students are thinking about the text itself, we're also going to have them take a good look at the types of vocabulary that are found in 5.1. So in addition to those negative terms that are right there in the introduction, there's a whole lot of different terminology that's both general, things like avail, swab, exonerate, and discipline-specific, genes, DNA. And some of them have really good context clues, like exoneration, then the next sentence talks about deferred justice. Students can probably figure that one out, but others don't. In fact, the term DNA is not even spelled out in that first section. So students should use that prefix root suffix chart that's in their academic notebook to kind of pull apart, what does DNA mean? Something like swab has analysis on a swab of evidence. That's not particularly good context. And so in that case, they might want to go to dictionary definition. So talking a little bit about the different types of words that they're going to find. And again, we're building on what they already know from Unit 1 and the different strategies that they can use to determine words that they don't know. Also building on Unit 1 and then looking at some specific cases in that paragraph will really help them remember all that good vocabulary learning that they had in the last unit. And we're going to be ramping up vocabulary learning throughout this unit to kind of take it to deeper levels. So getting them to start to notice the words, how they're related, how the author's using them is a good thing to do right here in the beginning of this chapter. We're also going to return to the juicy sentences that we used in Unit 1. So ask students to talk about this particular juicy sentence. Like a social security number, DNA is unique in virtually every person. So talk about what does it mean in the reading so far, what can it tell us about where this chapter is headed, and in fact, the last paragraph in 5.1 gives them a lot of clues into that. But thinking about like, how does this particular sentence, DNA is a unique identifier, going to be important as we're thinking about DNA and biotechnology, DNA and health, DNA and agriculture, and all those processes involved in how DNA works and is replicated. So students should just sort of get to start to thinking about that, and then we'll ask them to read and annotate the rest of 5.1 together with a partner. Once they finish 5.1, we'll move to the next activity, which is reading a New York Times article. And this article is about, does your DNA contribute to that wild streak that some people in your family have? And there's a lot of unfamiliar vocabulary in this article. So ask students to work in groups to circle those words and then separate them into discipline-specific and general vocabulary. So a word like gauge is a general vocabulary word. A word like genetic mutation would be a discipline-specific word. And their goal is to understand the discipline-specific words in this piece, and then to have enough information to understand the sentences for the rest of those terms. So have them read the article in pairs and discuss the article together after they're done using the text-dependent questions in the lesson plan. So the role of DNA, the controversies, the ethical issues, and how will an increase in knowledge about DNA and DNA traits personality traits impact society. So after they've read and they've annotated and you've discussed the reading, ask them to reflect on annotations as a class. So how did annotating the article differ from annotating the chapter? What did they learn about the content, how DNA technology has impacted our lives, and how does that differ from the beginning of feeling? So kind of comparing the two, trying to think about different perspectives on DNA, different purposes for the writing. And then after they've tried the annotation, both on the chapter and on the article, have them in their academic notebooks talk about it. So what did students like about it? What didn't they like about it? Talk about how annotation can help them with close reading, which is a really important component of the unit. And it's important to provide feedback to students on their annotations using that checklist that's in the lesson plans. So for a strategy like annotation, it's going to take students a while to master it. So there's some strategies that we learn over the course of this unit that you're going to teach it and they're going to get it. Annotation, not so much. And so this is one where you have to talk to them about how learning to annotate well is a process. And so if they feel like they're not getting all the most important information right now, that's okay. As they continue on, there is no reason why they can't go back and re-annotate something or add something to previous annotations as they realize that they missed an important piece. But their goal is to be able to pull out the most important information so that when they go back to study the text, they don't need to read everything again. They've already made some selections, pulled them out, and made sure that they understand them enough to write about them in their own words. So if they can do that, they should feel pretty good that they're on the path to becoming better at annotation. But that it really is a process. And usually as people start out with this strategy, it takes a little bit of time to get comfortable with it. And they should not worry about that at all. The comfort level will come the more they practice. And that right there is lesson 2 in Unit 2. Thank you.